Welcome to the Deep Dive, the mission where we take a stack of sources, articles, historical reports, and strategic analyses and extract exactly what you need to know about the defining moments in history.
And today, we are zooming in on a really critical pivot point for the British East India Company.
We are. This is the moment, fresh off their consolidation of power in Bengal, that they set their eyes on the dynamic, wealthy, and very volatile lands of South India.
This is a deep dive into the four Anglo-Mysore wars. We're talking about a 32-year conflict that absolutely, and I mean absolutely, determined the economic and political shape of the entire subcontinent.
And we're not just looking at, battle statistics. We're analyzing the complex cocktail of commercial interest, strategic paranoia,
And administrative innovation. That part's key. It's what allowed the EIC to dismantle the most powerful indigenous military threat they ever faced in India, the state of Mysore.
led by Hyder Ali and, of course, his son, Tipu Sultan. Our sources, they clearly frame this period as marking the end of the first round of the struggle for freedom. And the struggle here, it wasn't just for sovereignty, was it?
No, not at all. It was for economic self-determination. Our mission today is to show you how these wars, combined with these concurrent administrative overhauls under figures like Warren Hastings and Lord Cornwallis.
How they laid the permanent foundation for the Raj, before it was even officially called the Raj.
Wait, we're showing you the mechanism of empire building, the nuts and bolts.
So to really get this, you have to understand the sheer instability the EIC was exploiting.
You do. By 1761, the French were, for all intents and purposes, decisively defeated in the Carnatic Wars. But this didn't create stability.
They did the opposite.
It created a massive, hungry power vacuum in South India, and the British weren't invading some unified empire. They were wading into a three-way brawl.
Right. So you've got the state of Mysore, which was, arguably the most modern military power in the region,
For sure.
pitted against the powerful Maratha Confederacy to the north and west, and then the Nizam of Hyderabad, who controlled these vast tracts of central territory.
And these three heavyweights, they were locked in a state of perpetual rivalry.
And that context, that mutual enmity, is the golden key for the EIC.
It's everything. The British didn't need to invent a conflict. They just needed to exploit the existing, the ingrained financial and territorial rivalries. This was the original divide and rule opportunity.
The political system was almost designed to be exploited.
It really was. The inherent instability made the EIC's job of strategic expansion so much easier than it otherwise would have been.
Okay, let's unpack that. The core driving force. Why Mysore specifically? The primary interest, it wasn't glory. It was the EIC balance sheet.
100%. The shift south post-Bengal was overwhelmingly motivated by commercial necessity. They needed to secure their supply lines and just eliminate any threat to their massive multi-continental profit margins.
But our sources highlight something fascinating, which is that the Indian states themselves, their own internal dynamics, made conflict almost mandatory.
Precisely. You've hit on a crucial point. Indian states at the time were driven by a fundamental resource crunch. It wasn't just, individual rulers seeking personal power.
It was about state survival.
The survival of the state apparatus required constant income generation. Look at the Marathas.
Right.
They relied so heavily on expansion and military raids to collect revenue through specific taxes, primarily Chauth and Sardeshmukhi.
Okay, let's stop there for a second because we need to define those.
Yeah.
They're fundamental to understanding the Maratha state model.
Yeah.
What were Chauth and Sardeshmukhi?
So Chauth literally means 1/4. And it was a tribute, basically 25% of the revenue of a territory, that the Marathas levied from non-Maratha lands as a form of, protection money.
So pay us and we won't raid you.
Essentially, yes. And Sardeshmukhi was an additional levy, about 10% of the revenue, claimed by the Maratha ruler on the basis that he was the superior sovereign, the Sardeshmukh.
So their state was financially dependent on this system of external extraction. It forced them to constantly expand their sphere of influence and demand these payments from neighbors.
Exactly, like the Nizam or Mysore. Their financial model was inherently expansionary, which meant perpetual conflict was just. It was baked into the system. This mutual hostility was structurally engineered.
Providing the EIC with endless opportunities to form alliances. But Mysore, under Hyder Ali and later Tipu Sultan, they presented a far more direct and I'd say specific, even existential economic threat to the British than the Marathas did.
Oh, absolutely. It was about controlling global commodity trade.
It was a spice bottleneck.
That's the perfect term for it. Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan controlled the strategic Malabar coast. And that coast was the absolute non-negotiable hub for the trade in high-value things like pepper and cardamom.
So if the EIC lost access, or if the price was just unilaterally controlled by Mysore.
Their entire European market strategy was damaged. Seriously damaged.
And Tipu Sultan, he really recognized this and weaponized his geographical advantage, didn't he? He understood that economic leverage could be just as powerful as military force.
He was a genuine innovator in economic warfare, a pioneer, really. In 1785, he just issues an order. He stops the export of these key spices through his ports to the British.
It's an outright blockade.
It is, aimed at crippling the EIC's supply. And then he escalates it. In 1788, he banned all dealings, commercial or otherwise, with English traders entirely.
Wow.
This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a commercial declaration of war.
And if you look at the EIC's internal memos at the time, that level of economic threat must have made neutralizing Mysore the absolute top priority, especially for Madras.
It did. Mysore was a perpetual strategic threat to British control over the Madras presidency simply because it was too close, too powerful, and fundamentally too independent.
If Mysore can just cut off trade, Madras is economically useless.
Exactly. And at the same time, you have the Marathas representing a major threat to the vital cotton trade centered around Bombay. So the EIC is fighting for two different but equally vital commodity supply chains at once.
And then, hanging over all of this, you have the perennial global shadow of the French. That alliance between Mysore and the French wasn't just about a shared enemy, was it?
No, it was a massive security concern that spanned continents. In the context of the global Anglo-French rivalry, having a powerful Indian state, especially one as militarily advanced as Mysore, actively advised, trained, and supplied by your main European adversary.
It was simply intolerable.
Absolutely. It meant the European war could be instantly exported to India, endangering the entire company project. Neutralizing that French link was a constant, nagging strategic imperative.
Which sets the perfect stage for the initial conflicts. Let's move into that first struggle where the British learned a very painful lesson. Alliances are brittle.
And Hyder Ali was a formidable opponent.
The First Anglo-Mysore War, 1767-69.
Right. So the initial British impulse wasn't just about Hyder Ali's French leanings. They had a specific territorial goal. They wanted the Northern Circles.
A crucial coastal area.
Crucial. It would establish a secure overland communication link between Madras and their new solid base in Bengal.
So they basically used the Nizam to get that land, promising him military support against Mysore in return. And that's how they created that first anti-Mysore coalition.
Exactly. They engineered what was supposed to be this crushing tripartite alliance. The Marathas, the Nizam, and the British all lined up against Hyder Ali. Looked great on paper.
But it failed to account for the deep-seated political realities on the ground.
And that reality was that the alliance was inherently unstable. The Nizam feared the expansionary financial model of the Marathas almost as much as he feared Hyder Ali's growing strength.
They were natural enemies being forced into an unnatural alliance.
Which gave Hyder Ali the exact opening he needed for a stunning diplomatic coup.
And this is where you really see his genius. It wasn't just military might. He exploited the political fault lines.
He did. He successfully persuaded both the Marathas and the Nizam to switch sides. He just dissolves the British alliance and reforms it against the EIC.
How did he manage that?
He bought off the Marathas with some territorial concessions and then convinced the Nizam that, look, the British are the greater long-term threat here.
The result was a truly humbling, shocking defeat for the company. Hyder Ali didn't just win a border skirmish.
No, he brought the war right to their doorstep. It was an absolute military embarrassment. He executed this brilliant flanking maneuver, bypassed the main British forces, and just appeared, suddenly at the gates of Madras.
Imagine the scene. The capital of the Madras presidency, the center of their power in the south, is suddenly under threat of siege by an Indian ruler.
The panic was immediate. It was palpable. The British were forced, utterly compelled to sue for peace.
And this desperation, it led to the Treaty of Madras in 1769. What was the most dangerous clause in that agreement for the EIC?
Without a doubt, the inclusion of the Defensive Pact. Both parties agreed that if either were attacked by a third power.
And everyone knew they meant the Marathas.
Everyone. The other party was obliged to come to their aid. On the surface, it looks like parity, but it locked the British into a military obligation that they had absolutely no intention of ever keeping.
Which brings us directly to the primary, unforgivable cause of the Second Anglo-Mysore War, 1780-84. The deliberate breach of that very trust.
The betrayal was immediate and, frankly, short-sighted. When the Marathas attacked Hyder Ali in 1771, just 2 years after the treaty, the British flatly violated the pact. They stood aside, refused to send troops. For Hyder Ali, this wasn't just a political misstep. It was confirmation that the EIC could never, ever be trusted.
But wait, if they had just been humiliated at Madras and signed this pact specifically to prevent this from happening, why would they immediately sabotage it? That seems strategically suicidal.
It's a great question, and it really shows the internal conflict within the EIC. They were constantly balancing commercial costs against military necessity.
So it was about money.
Honoring the pact meant deploying expensive troops far from Madras to fight the Marathas, a war they didn't want and didn't think they could win cheaply. They chose the short-term cost-saving measure, sacrificing long-term trust, and they bet that Hyder Ali couldn't retaliate effectively.
And they were wrong.
They were very wrong.
The global stage also provided a lot of fuel for the second conflict. We're now in the middle of the American War of Independence, and the French are actively helping the Americans.
That's right. So this was a period of peak paranoia for the British. Every single French move anywhere in the world was viewed through the lens of a potential military threat to their Indian revenue base.
And that fear crystallized around Tipu Sultan's continued reliance on French support.
Which led to the immediate trigger, the British capture of Mahe.
So Mahe was a French settlement.
Yes, but critically, Hyder Ali considered it to be under the protection of Mysore's sovereignty. It was his main port for French military supplies. The British, desperate to cut that off, seized Mahe. Hyder Ali saw this as a direct, undeniable act of war.
So the war begins. But this time, the EIC is led by Warren Hastings, a man whose skills were, more in diplomacy and finance than battlefield command.
And Hastings knew the key to victory was fracturing the anti-British coalition, just like Hyder Ali had done in the First War. His most effective move was political.
Not military.
No. He detached the Nizam from the anti-British alliance by, bribing him with the valuable region of Guntur. This effectively isolated Hyder Ali again, forcing him to fight a multi-front war with fewer powerful allies.
But despite the diplomatic maneuvering, the battlefield was brutal. We see Sir Erkut defeating Hyder Ali decisively at the Battle of Porto Novo in 1781.
But again, Mysore didn't collapse. Hyder Ali died of cancer in 1782, but his son, Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, immediately stepped into command and just continued the fight.
Relentlessly.
Tipu was relentless. He sustained the struggle for 2 more years, and it led to this prolonged, drawn-out struggle that ultimately ended in a military stalemate, not a clear victory for either side.
And the result was the Treaty of Mangalore in 1784. Just the mutual return of territories. If you look at the trajectory of EIC power, this treaty it's unique.
It is vitally significant for you to grasp this point. The Treaty of Mangalore was the last time in Indian history that the British East India Company signed a treaty with a major Indian ruler on genuinely equal footing.
The last time.
They were exhausted, they'd gained nothing, and they were forced to negotiate a return to the status quo antebellum. After 1784, every single subsequent treaty reflects the EIC's growing, insurmountable dominance.
So while these exhausting wars are raging in the South, the true mechanism of long-term control is being forged hundreds of miles away in the administrative offices of Bengal.
This simultaneous internal restructuring is absolutely essential to the story. They weren't just winning battles, they were laying down the bureaucratic, the legal, and the financial foundations for a permanent state.
A state that could fund endless wars and generate profits back to London. So let's turn our attention to the architects of this system, starting with Warren Hastings, the first Governor General, from 1772 to 1785. His main mission was consolidating financial control.
And that began with dismantling Robert Clive's notorious structure. Hastings ended what was known as the dual system in 1772.
Okay, what was the dual system?
Under Clive, the EIC held the power of revenue collection, the Diwani, but the actual administrative responsibility, justice, police, the Nizamat, that technically remained in the hands of the puppet Nawab.
Usually managed by an Indian official, the Naib Diwan.
Right, and the Naib Diwan was the native deputy responsible for actually getting the money on the ground. The system was inherently corrupt and inefficient because power, the EIC's right to tax, was separated from responsibility, the Nawab's obligation to govern.
So Hastings gets rid of the middleman.
He eliminates the position, takes over direct revenue collection. This was a critical step toward establishing direct British governance. It ended the pretense of local rule.
And that was followed by rapid centralization.
Yes, the administrative heart of the operation, the Treasury, was immediately moved from Murshidabad to Calcutta, and he formally created the Board of Revenue to oversee it all. A clear bureaucratic hierarchy, answerable directly to the company.
Hastings then tried a major revenue experiment, the quinquennial settlement, a 5-year system which our sources define as an undeniable failure.
A disaster, but a predictable one. It was rooted in the desire for maximal short-term profit. He introduced a farming system. Land revenue collection was optioned off to the highest bidder for a 5-year term.
The idea being that competition would drive up the price.
Right. But the bidders, often corrupt EIC servants or newly wealthy locals, they bid far too aggressively. They wildly overestimated the land's yield to secure the contract.
And once they had it, they had to squeeze the peasants to make good on the bid.
Ruthlessly, they extorted taxes, seized property, and just destabilized the entire agricultural base.
Good.
The system caused massive social distress, failed to deliver reliable revenue, and forced Hastings to abandon it. He had to revert to a less profitable annual settlement in 1777.
But beyond revenue, Hastings also established a formal, systematic judicial structure.
Which was necessary to legitimize British authority as something more than just brute force. He set up a structured court system. The Diwan-i-Adalat for civil cases, property, commerce.
And the Faujdari-i-Adalat for criminal cases.
Exactly. And each had corresponding appeal courts. They were creating a clear divide between civil and criminal jurisdictions, a hallmark of modern legal systems.
And this was all given weight by the Regulating Act of 1773.
Which established the Supreme Court in Calcutta, but that court only applied English common law to British subjects. Hastings was smart enough to know he couldn't just erase existing Indian law.
So he tried to codify it.
He made the first serious attempt, leading to the Code of Gentoo laws in 1776, ensuring some local legal traditions were understood, even if it was through a company filter.
Okay, so following Hastings, we get the true systematizer, Lord Cornwallis, from 1786 to 1793. And our sources are clear. Cornwallis's administrative structures were so robust, they effectively lasted until 1858.
He built the machine, no question. And his most famous, or perhaps infamous legacy, is the Permanent Settlement of 1793.
This wasn't just a tweak to the tax system, was it?
No, it fundamentally restructured rural society and Bengal and beyond. It achieved 3 goals at once. First, it recognized the zamindars, who were previously just tax collectors, as the legal owners of the land.
A huge shift in property rights.
Massive. Second, it fixed the revenue they owed the EIC permanently. It was never to be increased, regardless of productivity or inflation. The state claimed 89% of this fixed amount. The zamindar kept 11%.
So the genius wasn't about maximizing profit immediately, but guaranteeing predictable profit forever.
Absolutely. It gave the EIC a secure, stable, predictable income stream independent of the weather or the cost of wars. They shifted all the risk onto the zamindar and the peasant.
And politically, it created a powerful, wealthy class of landowners.
The zamindars, whose status and wealth were now entirely dependent on the continuity of British rule, they became the EIC's most loyal political and economic base, a buffer class.
But the societal cost must have been enormous. It destroyed the older system of village communal control over land.
It did. It formalized a new, deeply entrenched class hierarchy. And the rigidity of the fixed tax rate meant that if a zamindar failed to pay on time, for any reason, his land was immediately auctioned off. It led to rapid displacement and huge social upheaval.
Cornwallis's influence wasn't just on land, though. He introduced the Cornwallis Code in 1793, which institutionalized the separation of powers.
A crucial reform to prevent unchecked local tyranny. He stripped the collector, the key EIC official for revenue, of his judicial power.
Before, the collector was judge, jury, and taxman.
Exactly. A recipe for abuse. Cornwallis separated those functions entirely, creating a new, distinct post, the district judge, whose sole purpose was justice. This clarity of function was a massive step toward a modern civil service.
And while he made some positive changes, like replacing amputation with prison terms, the defining and I think most damning legacy of Cornwallis was his policy of Europeanization.
Rooted in institutional racism.
Yeah.
This is the most cynical part of his structure. Cornwallis openly stated his belief that every Indian was corrupt. And this wasn't just a casual prejudice. It was the official justification for reserving all high-ranking posts exclusively for Europeans.
So educated, talented Indians with a long history of professional governance were suddenly barred from rising above a certain level of power.
It created a rigid, racist ceiling on ambition that defined the structure of the Raj for the next 60 years. Indian officials could not rise above Subadar, a junior officer rank in the army, or a deputy collector in the civil administration.
All the real power, all the high salaries, flowed exclusively to Europeans.
Ensuring total British control. It was a calculated, deliberate act of colonial displacement.
Okay, so with that financial and bureaucratic foundation securely laid in Bengal by Hastings and Cornwallis, the EIC now has the stability and the funding to deliver the decisive military blows in the south.
Exactly. Let's return to Mysore for the decisive blows, Wars 3 and 4.
The Third Anglo-Mysore War, 1790–92. Tipu Sultan was recovering, but he was still aggressive, still determined to regain his advantage.
And he gave the British the opening they were looking for. The trigger was a military confrontation involving a Dutch land sale and a British ally, Travancore.
What was the specific territorial spark?
The Raja of Travancore purchased two key territories, Jokottai and Kranganore, from the Dutch. Tipu claimed these lands were actually fiefdoms of Mysore.
So he argued the sale was illegal.
And an affront to his sovereignty. He attacked Travancore, which forced the British to honor their alliance and intervene.
And this time, the British made sure their coalition was absolutely overwhelming.
They learned their lesson from the First War. No more diplomatic coups for Tipu. They formed a solid, binding triple alliance with both the Marathas and the Nizam.
And Lord Cornwallis himself, the administrative systematizer, he personally took command of the army.
He did. He led the campaign directly to Seringapatam, Tipu's capital.
And the result was total military and political humiliation for Mysore. The Treaty of Seringapatam in 1792 really was the beginning of the end for Tipu Sultan.
The terms were just devastating. Tipu was forced to surrender half of his territory, and it was strategically sliced up among the victors.
How so?
The British grabbed the crucial coastline Baramahal, Dindigul, and the Malabar coast, securing the pepper trade and cutting Tipu off from the sea. The Marathas got the Tungabhadra region, and the Nizam took the Pennar region. Mysore was fragmented, neutralized.
And the humiliation wasn't just territorial, the personal indignity was immense.
Tipu was forced to pay an astronomical indemnity of 3 crore rupees. And because he couldn't produce the entire sum immediately, his 2 young sons were taken as hostages by the British.
An unbelievable act.
It was the ultimate symbolic demonstration of Tipu's subordination. No independent ruler had ever suffered such a personal affront.
And Cornwallis's geopolitical strategy here is laid bare in his famous quote.
He stated it perfectly. We have effectively crippled our enemy without making our friends too formidable.
Meaning he destroyed Tipu, but didn't give so much to the Marathas and the Nizam that they would immediately become the next big threat.
It was a brilliant, calculated piece of imperial maintenance.
This period of quiet was short-lived. Cornwallis was followed by Sir John Shore, who tried a policy of non-intervention, but that vanished. The second Lord Wellesley arrived in 1798.
Wellesley was an aggressive imperialist, and his arrival coincided with the absolute height of the Napoleonic Wars in Europe. This global context fundamentally dictated the outcome of the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War in 1799.
This was no longer about pepper.
It was about global survival. The threat of Napoleon had metastasized, he had conquered Egypt, and had explicit plans to use it as a staging ground to invade India.
Potentially linking up with local forces like Mysore.
To destroy British commercial dominance, the stakes were higher than ever before.
And Tipu Sultan, seeing this global chaos, he viewed this external crisis as his final, best chance to reverse his crippling losses.
And he did so by embracing a radical, non-traditional alliance. This is where Tipu transcends being just a local ruler. He was highly sophisticated. He saw his struggle against the British as part of the broader anti-monarchical movement sweeping Europe.
He wasn't just recruiting French soldiers, he was adopting their political philosophy.
Exactly. He planted a tree of liberty in Seringapatam, called himself Citizen Tipu, and he joined the Jacobin Club.
Which to the British wasn't just an alliance, it was revolutionary treason.
It gave Wellesley the absolute justification he needed to eliminate Mysore once and for all.
And Wellesley wasted no time. He issued an ultimatum.
He demanded that Tipu accept the subsidiary alliance, the mechanism of control we're about to discuss. Tipu, knowing this meant giving up all meaningful sovereignty, flatly refused.
And that refusal led directly to the final confrontation. the Battle of Seringapatam in 1799.
The British forces, overwhelming in number and motivation, won decisively. And Tipu Sultan, the Tiger of Mysore, refused to surrender. He died fighting, defending his capital.
His death marked the definitive end of the most prolonged and costly struggle the EIC faced in South India.
It did. The aftermath was a masterclass in controlled annexation, designed to maximize British security and indirect rule.
So they didn't just annex the whole kingdom.
No, they annexed the coastline and other critical territories, permanently halting any future French access. But to maintain a facade of local legitimacy and avoid administrative costs, they restored the old Hindu Wadiyar dynasty. They placed a minor prince named Krishnaraja on the throne.
But the restoration was strictly conditional?
Conditional on the immediate imposition of the very system Tipu had died fighting to avoid, the subsidiary alliance. Mysore instantly became a dependent state, permanently subjugated to the EIC. The struggle was over.
So let's talk about the subsidiary alliance system because it's so critical. It was the template Wellesley used to expand British control across the entire subcontinent, often without fighting expensive wars.
It was strategically brilliant. Perfected by Wellesley between 1798 and 1805, it ensured permanent Indian dependency. The EIC controlled the defense and foreign policy of a state while forcing the state itself to pay for the privilege.
Okay, let's break down the 4 key terms. What were the core conditions imposed on any Indian state that signed this pact?
First, and most importantly, the state surrendered all foreign relations to the company. No communication, no treaties, no alliances with any other states without explicit British permission.
So the ruler becomes strategically isolated.
Completely. Second, the state was forced to pay for a substantial British military force, the subsidiary force, which was permanently stationed inside its own territory, supposedly for the ruler's protection.
And that payment, the subsidy, was the main mechanism of economic drain.
Exactly. Third, a British resident, an EIC official, was permanently installed at the local court. His real job was to influence the ruler, gather intelligence, and ensure company interests were always prioritized.
The shadow ruler.
You could say that. And finally, the state was strictly banned from employing any other Europeans, specifically targeting the French officers and engineers who provided crucial military and technical expertise.
It ensured the technological gap only widened.
It did.
So if the EIC was providing protection, what was the real devastating impact on the Indian states that signed it? What was the so what for the local population?
The consequences were catastrophic. They transformed vibrant states into economic shells. First, the rulers instantly lost all independence and the right to self-defense. They became puppets.
And financially, the system was designed to crush them.
The subsidy payments were exorbitant, often a third, sometimes even half, of the state's total annual revenue. This led to ruinous taxation on the peasantry, starving the state of funds for anything else. Pure economic drain.
And the immediate destruction of the local military must have caused massive social upheaval.
It did. The Indian soldiers who previously served the ruler were instantly disbanded, leading to massive, widespread unemployment. This created a large, skilled, but disaffected population, leading to chronic social instability and banditry.
Which, ironically, the EIC would then claim the right to fix.
Exactly. And finally, you have what our sources call the moral decay of the ruling class, because the British military guaranteed the ruler's security from both external threats and internal revolts.
Even revolts spurred by their own bad governance.
The rulers became utterly irresponsible and oppressive. They had no checks and balances. They knew they could loot the treasury, impose impossible taxes, and no matter how badly they governed, the EIC would keep them on the throne.
This created a cynical loop, didn't it? The alliance enabled misrule, which led to popular distress, which then gave the EIC the pretext to intervene further, claiming they were restoring order.
Precisely. A self-fulfilling prophecy of dependency and decay.
That brings us to the end of this journey. We've seen how commercial interests drove 4 wars, and how those military victories were solidified by the permanent settlement and the subsidiary alliance. If we just quickly review the arc of conflict, the shift in power is staggering in just 3 decades.
It's a clear trajectory. The First War, 1769, that was a win for Hyder Ali. The British were humbled. The Second War, 1784, a stalemate negotiated on equal terms.
Then the Third War, 1792, a major crippling loss for Tipu. Half his kingdom gone, his sons taken hostage.
And the Fourth War, 1799, was total defeat. Tipu's death and the imposition of the subsidiary alliance. British hegemony in South India was secured.
It's a profound narrative of synthesis military might combined perfectly with administrative structure. The work of Cornwallis ensuring fixed revenue and Wellesley ensuring political control, that was just as vital as the military force on the battlefield.
The EIC realized that an empire isn't maintained by cannons alone. It has to be maintained by tax rolls, legal codes, and predictable revenue streams. The foundation they laid during this period was already entirely British long before the Crown took over.
And as we close this deep dive, let's circle back to that single, compelling detail about Tipu Sultan that elevates this struggle from a local one to a global ideological conflict.
Indeed. We noted that in the lead-up to the Fourth War, Tipu Sultan actively engaged with the radical ideals of the French Revolution. He planted the Tree of Liberty. He declared himself Citizen Tipu.
He joined the Jacobin Club, a powerful ruler in South India embracing radical European revolutionary thought. It's astonishing. How should we interpret that?
It forces you to view Tipu Sultan not just as a regional despot fighting for territory, but as a ruler attempting to align himself with what he saw as the leading anti-imperial, anti-monarchical force on the planet. He was trying to link his local fight against the EIC to the global fight for Republican ideals against the old European order.
So it raises a fascinating question.
It does. Had the French Revolution succeeded in its global aims, would Tipu Sultan have been remembered less as a regional antagonist of the British and more as one of the world's first anti-colonial revolutionaries, fully engaged in the dawn of modern political ideology? That is something truly worth reflecting on.